Are the slides showing okay? Okay. All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining today's CARC strategy and policy facing track call. So I'll quickly give an introduction about CARC. So CARC is organization for all the research, computing, and data professionals. So for folks that just like who are involved with any aspect of research, computing, and data, abbreviated as RCD. And CARC has various different efforts. One of the big effort is People Network. It's like a year-long virtual conference. Then there are working groups that focus on specific aspects of research, computing, and data, like professionalization, career arcs, and capabilities model. Then there are interest groups. These are some budding ideas that people want to discuss around. So we have CI workshop, it's called CI workshop, decadal surveys, and student and staff workforce development. So those kind of are interest groups. And then all these things are made possible with the operations group supporting all the CARC logistics and engagement. So, and then there's the CARC leadership that helps with all these CARC activities. So People Network, as I said, it's year-round conference. There are 5 different facings as of now: the data facing, emerging centers, researcher facing, system facing, and then strategy and policy facing track. We are part of the SPF track, strategy and policy facing track, where we focus on leadership at different institutes, the cultures, the challenges associated with managing RCD centers or technologies, how to engage with other partners, and so on, funding models. So all the topics associated with setting up strategies and policies at a given institute. So that's what we discuss in this track. There are other tracks that if you're interested, we highly recommend joining those. One of the things that we have started doing is we've started having onboarding calls. So tomorrow we'll have an onboarding call where new folks can just simply join in and figure out how can they get involved with CARC, talk to people, get an idea of what all CARC is. Sometimes it gets overwhelming, so it's nice to go attend that call. That's going to be tomorrow. The call coordinates for that call are listed in the call doc. And I think call doc and link should be in the chat, or I'll share it once I'm done with the presentation. If you want to jumpstart without having to go to that meeting, you can just start with getting started. Send an email to getstarted@carc.org and join our mailing list to get involved with working groups. Again, you can send that email listed over here. So the strategy and policy facing track, these are the committee members. Basically, committee members decide what we are going to discuss in the upcoming calls, set the tone for the track. Myself and Patrick are currently co-coordinators doing regular updates on what we are going to do in the next call and so on. So planning for the track. If anyone's interested in joining strategy and policy facing track committee, we always welcome more committee members. We want to expand that committee as much as we can. And then we also are looking for co-coordinators. Patrick's been doing this for a while now, so he's hoping someone can step up. For the upcoming calls, we'll have leadership training programs. So what in our June call, so we are planning to discuss what different options that generally are available for folks in the research, computing, and data leadership roles, or want to get into those roles. So we'll cover various leadership programs that we are familiar with. And if you are aware of any that we might not be covering, please come prepared to discuss those during that call as well. For today's call, we are going to talk about institutional metadata. We have Tiffany Deebs from EDUCAUSE Core Data Services and Patrick Schmitz from CaRCC Capabilities Model. They are going to discuss various challenges that they have faced, and what basically talk about what they do in data collection and what challenges they are facing, and how to use that metadata. So I'll hand it over to Patrick and Tiffany. I don't know who wants to go first. I will stop my screen share.
Thanks, Amit. Tiffany, do you want to go first, or you want me to go first? You're muted.
Sorry about that. Why don't you go ahead and set the stage for us, and then I'll jump in when you're ready for me.
Okay, will do then. Let me get the right screen up. Okay, can everybody see that?
Yes.
All right. So, as Amit mentioned, what I want to talk about today is, the ways that we describe institutions, and what we want to do with the data we collect and what we need about the institutions and people in order to do that. So the point of this really is that, we gather data, we do surveys, we build data sets and things like that, because we're trying to understand who's in our community and, what they're doing. How do we understand more about what's going on in our community and what people are doing? So we generate data sets like the Core Data Survey and other things that EDUCAUSE gather. A lot of different groups in our community are doing surveys and things like that. With the capabilities model, we're generating community data sets. So all this stuff, we've got a lot of data. We want to be able to get insights out of that. So as a quick example, what I want to do is just show, that's not what I wanted. Can you guys see the portal that I'm showing now? That worked?
Yes.
All right. So this is the data viewer for the capabilities model portal. And we have data about the community itself, ranging from these map views that allow me to understand the distribution of folks who are involved. I can get in and dig into the makeup. So I might be comparing the institutional classification or what the public-private makeup is of the different folks that are using the tools and things like this. All these different aspects of this, what their mission is, the institutional classification, what region they're in, how big the institution is, EPSCoR status, and the research expenditures. These are all things about the institutions that let us actually understand, okay, who's out there and who's using our tools. At this point, with 200 users, we've actually got a reasonable representation of what's going on in our community. And then we also obviously have the data about the capabilities in here. So, if I'm looking at something like, let's say I want to do data-facing topics and I'm interested in primarily R1s, and I'm going to compare by EPSCoR status, I select all these different aspects of institutions that allow me to say, all right, let me look and understand, for example, among R1s, how do EPSCoR institutions compare to non-EPSCoR institutions? And on this data facing, we see there's a big difference. So these are the insights we want to gather from the data that we're generating. In order to do that, then we need the metadata about the institutions. So the other thing is, beyond individual data sets, obviously we'd like to be able to combine data sets. Tiffany and I talk a lot about, how would we understand what information is being gathered about institutions broadly and their IT support and their teaching and learning support, and how do we compare that to what we're learning about research support, or when the RCD professionalization folks do a survey, or maybe RDAP or USRSE does a survey. How can we combine the data sets to actually understand more about what's going on? So in general, obviously we want to use existing standards wherever possible. One of the biggest things is that people understand things, like people know, for the most part, what Carnegie Classification is. We don't have to explain to them what that means. And people have thought long and hard about a lot of these things to get them right. We don't want to try to replicate that or make mistakes in doing that. At the same time, a lot of the standards that are describing institutions here in the US are very US centric. So we don't benefit from that same kind of description about things like Canadian institutions. We have quite a few Canadian partners that are participating. We have a half a dozen international partners beyond North America that are also participating in some of our work. And we don't have a metadata standard that extends beyond our shores, unfortunately, to accommodate all those folks. So that's kind of a problem. In addition, many of the things that we've got right now are about universities, colleges and universities, and they don't do anything to help us when we've got not-for-profit labs or national labs or industry partners who are also engaging with us. And then obviously we want to use an authoritative source. We don't want to just use an ad hoc one if we can. So if somebody got curated survey data like the Core Data Survey from EDUCAUSE, this obviously provides a bit of credibility. We have some heft behind what we're claiming when we're trying to say something about our community. On the other hand, some of these authoritative services I mentioned, don't merge across the domains. There are sources of information about Canadian institutions, but they have a really different metadata model, which doesn't help us. And we think of IPEDS and Carnegie as fairly authoritative, but in my own work, digging into things like research expenditures that are reported by them, people seem to interpret that very differently when they answer the surveys. And so sometimes what's on an institution's website is drastically different from what IPEDS is reporting in terms of their research expenditures. It may be above or it may be below, and I don't honestly know what's going on there. I think it's just different interpretations of what they count. Some may count all the salaries of all the faculty and others may not. So there's some issues there. Where we can, we want to automatically integrate this into functionality. So when we built the portal, for example, we used CI Logon because we thought, oh, great, that'll actually, for one thing, people don't have to have another set of credentials to use our tool. And then we'll also get the institutional affiliation, except that the CI Logon domain isn't always the university domain. And we're having some problems where we're seeing duplicate instances of a given institution inside our system because of that and some other issues. Where people don't have CI Logon, the social credentials like Google and Microsoft are fairly widespread and allow people to, again, to leverage an existing logon, but then we have to do additional steps to affiliate them to the institution. So we need their affiliation in order to leverage all that metadata we get. So where do we get our data from? Mostly, a lot of it is coming from IPED, the Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. That's part of the Department of Education. We also get some other DOE data sets separately, in particular around minority serving status, because they track that and they keep that up to date. IPED lags a little bit on some of this stuff, especially research expenditures. It's often 12 to 15 months later. Like in February, we finally got the 2022 data for research expenditures. So there's, it's not perfect, but it's at this point, it's one of the richest data sets we have available. Carnegie Classification, again, it's curated, so it has that authoritative aspect. It's widely understood across the US, and there's some awareness beyond the US, I think. The algorithm, for example, what is an R1, what is an R2, has been somewhat opaque, or at least a bit complex in understanding. They've and then the difference between a high R2 and a low R1 in terms of research expenditures is not that big a deal in terms of what that institution's actually like, and yet that's a pretty big distinction in the world of Carnegie. So they're definitely working on that. One of the we'd hoped to get somebody from there. We've been talking to them. They're really, really busy taking all the input they got when they solicited a lot of input after announcing that they're going to make some changes to the classification, and they're heads down and doing all that analysis. So they weren't able to join us today. They're looking, I think, to make the model a lot simpler. They're also looking to incorporate some ideas that I think align with things that we've been looking at around just declaring what is a research university. So we'll see what happens with that. That's definitely going to be a shift in terms of how we're using the metadata that's coming out of that. I mentioned one of these things that we're using. In 2006, a very interesting ECAR paper came out that was looking at IT engagement and research. And one of the things that they did at the time when they were asking, they did a big survey, they asked what they thought the mission of the university was. And what they found as they started analyzing the data is that this mission, which ranged from teaching exclusive to teaching focused to balanced to research focused, they found that that was a much better predictor of likeness or shared qualities among universities than Carnegie was. And they thought that that ended up much better capturing really what we're talking about among the distinctions among universities. And so that's one of the things that we incorporated. And it sounds like maybe some of where Carnegie Classification is going is moving towards this a little bit in terms of talking about just research universities. So we'll see. And then obviously we get a lot of data out of all the CaRC activities. So we, in addition to the institutional metadata that we gather as part of when people create a profile, we also have the data itself on capabilities, and then there's all the surveys we do. People Network is gathering a lot of interesting data just on who's showing up to our community calls and things like that. So there's a lot of different sources of data. Our approach on this has been to start from iPads and Carnegie, filter where appropriate. For example, Carnegie has almost a dozen variations on bachelor's and associate's programs. Because they tend not to be research intensive, we tend to group those into a more simplified model so that we don't have that much granularity in those. We also do things like everybody who's not in the US, we just say, okay, well, you're non-EPSCoR since that is a US program. And then we extend it where we need it. So for example, the iPads region is really useful. And it provides a nice way of grouping people into areas of the country, but we needed to add Canada. And for right now, we've added just a simple international because we don't have a ton of international partners, but at some point we may have to evolve that. The institutional classification builds upon the Carnegie classification and adds non-university and industry classification, but where there are existing ones like R1 and R2 and M1 and M2 and things like that, we just leverage those directly. And then we tweaked the mission that I mentioned in that paper. We added one more, which is a research exclusive, which doesn't exist across most universities, but there are things like national labs and not-for-profit research institutes that really are research exclusive. And then we added some questions about organizational structure, reporting lines, and stuff like that. So, we have to, one of the issues is that there's some data that we have to ask people about. Like the mission, there was no place that had a definitive source of information about what people declared as their mission. We're basically building that right now. And there's no Carnegie or iPads for international institutions, so we have to ask people to put in what they think their equivalent is for all these things. The other thing is that the community is evolving. Are we going to have to, if we get a lot more engagement beyond North America, we're going to have to subdivide international out. And so basically, as our community becomes more inclusive of those institutions beyond universities, the metadata we use to describe institutions is going to have to evolve as well. In general, we don't like changing metadata models, but adding new things is a lot better than changing them or reorganizing or deleting them. So that's a little less risky. Then we may need to learn more about industry partners and create new institution classifications as we try to understand that world better. And then another question is, we may be being a little too research centric because the same technology that we're all involved in supporting, whether it's what they call it research computing and data or cyber infrastructure, it's core to instruction and training in computational and data intensive domains and methods. And a lot of bachelor, primarily undergraduate institutions and some smaller schools, most of the work is really supporting instruction and training, although it's also benefiting the few researchers that are there. And so we may need to, I wonder if sometimes we need to shift our thinking just a little bit to reflect that reality. And I just don't know. So that's all that I wanted to share. It was basically a run through what I've been thinking about in terms of how we model universities and enable doing stuff like the data portal and the capabilities model. So, Lauren, Tiffany, why don't you go ahead and have your say, and we'll do questions all together. But definitely want to hear from people what their suggestions and reactions are.
Oh, perfect. Thank you, Patrick. And Patrick had a formal presentation. I do not have a formal presentation, but I want to walk you through a few of our services and our processes here with EDUCAUSE, just to give you an insight on how and where the Carnegie classifications those changes will impact us and what that looks like. First, I'd like to ask at a raise of hand, how many of you are familiar with our Core Data Service, CDS, at EDUCAUSE? If you could raise your hand, that'd be fantastic. Put your hand, yeah, that'd be great. Okay. So we have some folks that are familiar with it, which is wonderful. Appreciate your engagement. So with the Core Data Service, we do incorporate IPEDS data, similar to what Patrick was saying. We incorporated, and we did just receive 2022 data, right, for our work. And so that's a little disappointing sometimes that it's not up to date, but it's okay. It is what it is. Our IPEDS data are critical in our CDS and many of our articles, because that's how we basically have defined the categories for our institutions. Many of the CDS participants have shared with me, although the Carnegie classifications are helpful, they're not always accurate for them. So for example, the baccalaureate degree institutions often have a range of number of enrolled students and budgets from a low number to very high, which is concerning for them when they want to try to do some benchmarking. So there are many of our members that do other filtering in our CDS, and I'm going to show you CDS, because of that, because the categories are so high. Patrick, I saw your hand. Do you want to go ahead?
That was an artifact of your earlier question.
Okay. Oh, thank you. Yeah, so we've heard the folks with the need to break things down differently, right? I love the fact that you are focused on the institutional mission. I think that is such a great component of what you're viewing, because of when you're doing some insights and some analytics and benchmarking, that can really shine some light on things differently in which institutions you want to find value and do a little bit of comparing. So the folks that I've worked with, we've done the voice of customer interviews within the last year, and we meet a lot with our members to get feedback. And again, although the Carnegie classifications is a great start for their filtering and the breakdown, it's not a great reflection. So I'm really, really interested in how they're going to do this differently. With that said, I want to show you, I'll show my screen a little bit. With our Core Data Service, we have something called our Analytics Services, our Interactive Almanac. And so I want to share with you that that's exactly how we break down some results for our members to see. Can you see my Interactive Almanac okay? Yeah. As you can see, we just take the primary Carnegie classifications and break it down and demonstrate it this way, because that's what has been a practice, right, for so very, very long. And I think as we've evolved, as we've learned more, as there's just so many components that to do it differently will be challenging, and yet maybe it will be of value. As you can see here, we have the central IT staff FTE. And again, we have everything broken down in that manner from fiscal year to fiscal year. Many of our, again, as Patrick indicated, many of our reports are broken down by Carnegie classification. So for our Core Data Service, I'm going to pop over to that for you. In our analytics services, we have our Core Data Service here. The institutional, we have something called institutional profile. I'm going to show you this so that you can understand the IPEDS data and where it comes in. We have our what we call our institutional demographics. And this is the module in which our IPEDS data is applied for this particular service. As you can see with the institutional characteristics, private, public, multi-campus, urban or rural, the type of degrees, hospitals or not. And so our curriculum, we have it broken down into many components, which is valuable because our members do look at our data in these different filtering areas as well. But not all, the majority of this data comes from iPads. Now, as you can see, there's an edit feature. There are some things that come over from iPads that may not accurately reflect. Typically in an institution, it would say iPads, because EDUCAUSE is not an institution. Ours has names there because we don't have iPads data. So you would see, if you went into yours, you would see where it showed iPads. It would show iPads data and when it was brought in and integrated. And so we are very dependent on the iPads data and the classifications, and with our searching, with our benchmarking data. And so in CDS, I'll just briefly show you. Again, EDUCAUSE, I don't give a good representation, but we do break it down. I don't know if I can even demonstrate it well, even within this area by the Carnegie classifications as well. Although folks can filter a little bit differently by questions, by normalizations, but primarily we still implement some of those Carnegie classifications in there. So again, our research team during their reporting often break down the results by Carnegie classification. CDS is driven by that. We do create within this system peer groups that are the initial peer groups are all the Carnegie classifications. And so it's important to have them. Again, as Patrick mentioned, the international institutions don't fall within the iPads, right? And currently within CDS, they have limited ability to contribute some of their institutional demographics comparable. So that's something we are going to be rebuilding our CDS, and that's an area that we're taking a look at to understand how best we can have them contribute similar data for those comparisons and that benchmarking. With that, I'm going to pause for questions and other discussion.
So there's a
thanks,
question in the chat. Yeah.
Yep.
Do you want to take on that one?
I
So
see
are there,
yes.
Carl, do you want to say, hop on and ask your question, or do you want me to repeat it either way?
Yeah. Are there any granting institutions like NSF, NIH? Is their grant structure depending upon these changing designations, changing classifications from Carnegie?
I'm not sure. I know that there are some programs that are directed at smaller institutions. There are definitely programs directed at minority serving institutions. And then of course there have been traditionally EPSCoR programs, although NSF is shifting around how they're funding EPSCoR quite a bit. So I don't know the answer to that, Carl. You know, there are others who know a lot more about these grant programs. And what I suspect the main thing that they're interested in more, I think, is that they only fund U.S. institutions and things like that. There's other aspects of it that they filter on. Dana, Lauren, and others do you know of anything where the programs are tied to a classification like that?
I haven't, other than what you've already mentioned, right? I'm going to say smaller, and that's usually not well defined. But most of the time, if you look at solicitations, it'll be like, you know, institutes of higher ed, and they don't narrow awards down further than that, or nonprofits.
Yeah, other than like, EPSCoR or specific minority serving institution categories, referring to federal definitions.
One thing that I do know is that there are a fair number of private not-for-profit institutes. And then, of course, there's national labs and things like that are not universities. They're outside of the Carnegie world, and they definitely pull in money from the national funders. You know, even NASA and things like that are not universities, obviously. And then there's groups like the Jackson Labs and the Howard Hughes Medical Institute and all these things, that they're private not-for-profits, and there's probably some private for-profits as well. Chen Zuckerberg is another one in the Bay Area. Those aren't currently represented, and that's one of the challenges. We had some people from those areas who wanted to engage with CARC, and they're participating, and in some cases they're using the capabilities model or other things like that. And we needed to accommodate them and let them compare with like. Tiffany talked about defining a peer group, and that's one of the things that's interesting and a little challenging is we didn't want to define what peer groups were a priori, and that's part of why we have all these different kinds of metadata. For some folks, they say, my institution cares about other R1s. We say, great, and that's in there. Others say, well, what we really care about is places that are about the same size of us as students and are within, say, 30% of our research expenditures. And so that's, you can filter on that and define a peer group that you're actually trying to compare against. So people do interpret this differently, and I think it's important to provide that flexibility. That's the flip side of that is the frustration at the quality of the data. And Tiffany, one of the things that I was really curious about is you mentioned people being able to edit the data, and I particularly like that you're showing where the data has come from. And I think some people would like to be able to put in current data for their research expenditures, which I understand, but if everybody doesn't do that, then you're not really comparing apples to apples. And so I kind of scratch my head on some of these things to know what's the right thing to do.
Yes, I agree with you. There's pros and cons, right? I have a good example of one institution that changed an iPad's data. Actually, I live in Minnesota, and one of our Minnesota institutes, Fond du Lac, was categorized as a 2-year institution. They now offer a 4-year degree within their institution. So officially, they are a 4-year institution in which they can claim that within but their iPad's data had not reflected it because it's kind of old. So anyway, Lauren.
Well, and you bring up something relevant to the point I was going to make here too, which is that I think there's a lot of value for the campuses that are leveraging your data sets and your tools in being able to compare themselves to more than one category or even type of category. For example, an institution that is transitioning from being 2-year to 4-year might want to be able to compare themselves to both of those categories, or EBSCOR compare itself to other EBSCOR institutions versus comparing itself to institutions more broadly.
Well, yeah, these research institutes and national labs, they're in a really tricky position because who do they consider their peers? And what are they actually? Some of it is also what are you trying to do with the data? Of course, if you're just trying to understand where they should be investing or what others are doing, then it's sort of exploratory. But if you're trying to justify budget, then you have to try to find some reasonable peers. If you're a small private not-for-profit research lab focused in one area of research, who do you compare to? So that's why some of it, I think sometimes research expenditures and size, is really useful for some. The other thing is Carnegie has some weirdnesses. It dumps all the TCUs into their own classification. And that may make a lot of sense in one area, but if what they're really trying to do, if you've got one of the larger tribal colleges that's doing some research and they actually want to look at schools about their size that are doing research to compare themselves, then being classified as a TCU instead of as like a 2-year or a 4-year that's about the right size is going to make a lot more sense. So and this is the thing, we're trying to be kind of agnostic about what different kinds of metadata we incorporate so that people can use the different ones that they like. And that's some of what I wanted to put out to everybody here is, when you think about what you would like to do with the data sets that are available, what are the questions you would like to ask about different kinds of community data? And one of the things that I know that we would like to figure out is what are the budgets associated with, and what are the staffing associated with research support? And people keep asking us to put that in to the profile that we have for the capabilities model. The reason we haven't is because we feel we're going to have to do so much training and explanation and telling people how to gather that number. Because if you have a central group, it's really easy. You have one budget. If you have a highly federated support model, it's really hard to know how you add up those people and those dollars. Nevertheless, it's one of those things that everybody wants to know. So are there other questions? If you were either trying to figure out something about your program or make the case for funding or something like that, what are the other questions you would like to be able to ask of community data?
I think I already asked you this, but then I'll repeat it here. Is one of the things that I was looking for recently was we have more and more projects that are evolved that require protected environment, like the data is some sort of protected data set. And I wanted to compare what other peer institutes are doing. Like, are they investing into this ecosystem? Are they seeing actually increase in, first of all, are they seeing increasing in these kind of projects? And then how are they investing into these kind of projects? So I wanted to compare. So I found some information through the RCD Nexus portal. So that was useful. But if there's more additional information, like the recent data was limited in terms of only 13 institutes, R1 institutes responded. So that's not a big data set that I can take to my leadership. But yeah, those kind of questions would definitely be, yeah, that's something I'm interested in, I guess, in that now.
I mean, I think it's closer to around 40 R1s that are represented in there. And there is a section on support for sensitive data, an area that we haven't released yet because we're trying to figure out what to do. When people complete the capabilities model, one of the things they do is they mark areas as priorities for them, which are usually areas of investment, as you're asking, or areas of concern. We haven't quite figured out how to visualize that yet. It's something we actually want to do some focus groups with people to say, okay, well, because I think that can reveal that a little bit, Amit. When we've done reports in the past, we found some interesting things that came out of that, where we sort of aggregate what a lot of people are saying about areas of priorities. And we found, like among EPSCoR states, there was a lot of interest in better strategic planning and a lot of interest around data. Not super big surprises, but still kind of interesting. And I think it'd be fun, as you say, Amit, to know, okay, who's looking at and how important is it to institutions to look at things like sensitive and control and secure data environments and stuff like that. So that's a good example of, yeah, how do you tease something interesting out of the data? Are there other things people are curious about? It doesn't have to be the capabilities model data. It's stuff you would learn from core data or from the surveys or from People Network or different things.
I was just going to mention that things are shifting. I mean, as always, things are shifting, right? The world is changing. We tried to spend time with our members and listen before we build a survey for the upcoming year. And we're in the process of doing the 2024 survey. And we're getting great feedback on what's important. And as you talked about strategy, we had identified 4 areas of emerging technology and asked about their investment. Well, interestingly, AI was on one of the categories last year, and it was very limited investment because everybody's still trying to figure things out, right? So there's interest in shifting from how much you're investing to what is the maturity. So that strategic planning, right? Where are people going to, where are resources being dedicated? What does that look like? And so that's what they're asking, more of the strategic questions and less about, I mean, they still want to know about some funding, but it's trying to figure out where everybody's sitting and where everybody's going, strategically based on data. So it's interesting.
Yeah, there was a recent one of those quick polls from EDUCAUSE And the quick result that I got out of it is that people are scrambling to come up with policy around these AI tools. And they're desperately hoping for help on this, and they want to see examples. Which makes a lot of
Governance,
sense.
right? Governance, policy, all of the above. Yeah. And not just AI, it's other emerging technologies, and even with the infrastructure. What are we doing? Data infrastructure. Where is everybody going? Because of the evolution of everything, and security. It just is impacting the work so drastically every single day that strategy models continue to have to evolve.
Yeah. Yeah. Scott puts in the chat quantum. And that's another one that, you know, a lot of people are still waiting to figure out, okay, what are we supposed to do about this? Whereas others are leaping into it. I do want to, based upon the comment Tiffany just made, I want to make a quick plug for the Nexus Day that's going to happen before PERC this summer. One of the Nexus Day workshops that Susan Ivey, who's on the call, is also helping out with, as far as I know, is going to be around the topic of data governance and trying to exploring, you know, what's going on here, what do we need? Do you want to add anything, Susan, on that?
And no, Patrick, I didn't know I was helping out with it.
I thought so. It's still shaping up. Yeah.
I think I just told.
So Betsy Hillary at Purdue has agreed to lead it, and there's been a couple of people who've been involved in some of the discussions on the data facing track at CARC and some other areas. Maybe it was just wishful thinking, Susan, that I was going to twist your arm to try to get you involved, because I know you care about some of this stuff. But I think it's going to be a really interesting workshop. And so if you haven't already heard about it, go check out the CARC website and you'll see about Nexus Day. Dana, do you want to throw anything else on that?
It's going to be a whole bunch of fun in person. And then there'll be another workshop too. I'll find the link and stick it in the chat.
I had a different question, I guess. So do funding agencies look at where institutes are investing and then try to, I guess, balance their investment, or is it the other way around? Or is that, have you seen any kind of trend in that sense that funding agencies like NSF decided to invest in AI heavily? So then that would imply that the institutes are also, different institutes are increasing their funding in AI, or is it the other way around, that the institutes start off with investment in some areas and then funding agencies catch up? Have you seen that any kind of trends like that?
I have. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm going to say I've seen it both ways. So often something emerges from the community and a program officer will pick that up and provide sort of initial kind of funding around workshops and things like that. Often also the RCN model is used to help build sort of community-driven focus around an area that then builds into more program resource. And then on the flip side, where there's sort of the driven from the federal government need around particular areas like the NAIR, right? So that's being driven top down, where the funding, because of a national project, is now pushing down into the agencies, and then from there they're figuring out how do we build a program out to meet the federal aims of the initiative, right? So I've seen it both ways, and yeah, very often, if there's especially where there are sort of emerging kinds of things that the community really wants to help foster, that's where those workshop and RCN proposals can really help, drive a new program area.
Oh, thanks. So I guess as for the data set that CARC has and EDUCAUSE has, have you seen funding agencies querying those data sets, or that's not been tracked?
I'm not aware of any.
Yeah, I'm sure that they're looking at them in the national statistics resource that's driven by NSF. I'm sure they're looking at them. But yeah, I haven't heard anything about any convergence across them.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions for Patrick, Tiffany?
Patrick, do we want to talk about meeting with?
Yeah, we are. Thanks, Tiffany. Actually, why don't you go ahead?
So the folks from regarding the Carnegie Classification are willing to meet with us and provide a 45-minute presentation regarding the upcoming changes. I don't think they would be specific about the changes, but perhaps the why and maybe a methodology and maybe a little bit of insight. They offered to meet with us, and I think it might give us a good opportunity to get a better understanding of potentially where we might be going. They asked us just to select a few dates and times to propose to them. So I'd like to open it up to see how best we could do that. I don't know if there's an upcoming meeting that we could do it during, or what is our best option.
I mean, I think, as you said, part of it is we have to see when they're ready. You know, they're in the analysis. I don't remember if they've announced a deadline for making public the changes, and I forget exactly what their process is. I know that they took a bunch of input at the beginning of this year, at the end of last year and beginning of this year, and then they went away on that. I don't know if they're going to put out a draft and solicit input or what exactly. So I think we should keep talking to them, and when it looks like there'd be a great place. So thanks, Bob. Bob, what does it say on the timeline?
I don't think they're releasing 2024 data until 2025.
We meant actually about their process for redoing. So ACE and Carnegie together are working on this reworking of the classification system, and that was the timeline we're wondering about.
Yeah, that's part of what they actually list on I believe on the website is the various sort of deadlines or public.
Yeah, I thought I remembered that. I think
Yeah,
sometime this summer they said
I'll dig around for it.
Yeah. Anyway, yeah, I mean, if people are interested, I think, we could certainly talk to them about coming back and presenting here. I think there is some, but I spend so much of my day elbows deep in data and metadata that my view of the importance of this and the interesting of it, so it may be skewed. So others should speak up if they want to hear more about this.
I guess people are people interested in hearing more about Carnegie classification, or like you can just raise your hand if you're interested and we can try to schedule something. If there's not much interest, then maybe we'll have to rethink on what we can present out of that meeting.
Yeah, we could always just report back if people would
Yeah.
rather that.
I guess a report back is preferred. Okay.
Sounds good.
All right. So if there's no further questions, then I'd like to thank everyone for participating in today's call. We have an exciting talk for next month on June 5th. So hope to see all of you for that call. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us.
Bye.
Patrick, do you want to stop the recording?